Not all heroes wear capes. They come from every walk of life. Across history, women have shown extraordinary courage in war, survival, leadership, and sacrifice. I'm not talking about fictional characters like Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman. I'm talking about real women like Deborah Sampson, Molly Pitcher, Sacagawea, Sybil Ludington, and countless others. From the Vikings to ancient Egypt to the kingdoms of West Africa, history is filled with documented stories of women whose bravery shaped the world. When you think of wilderness survival, women are not the popular topic of discussion. After all, the frontier wilderness was too brutal, too dangerous, too lawless. But today, I want to turn your attention to a forgotten history of a woman with a lot of grit, a rifle, and the sound of mailbags slamming onto the stagecoach carriage. This woman was not your average frontier lady. Her name was Mary Fields. And in the frozen mountains of Montana, where wolves howled, roads vanished under snow, and bandits watched lonely trails, she became legendary. They called her Stagecoach Mary. She was one of the first African American women to carry U.S. mail. A woman who walked through blizzards, fought off danger, and built a legend in a world determined to shut her out. This is the story of wilderness mail carrier who refused to give up. Mary Fields was born into slavery around 1832 in Tennessee. There is little that's known about her earliest years in life. Like countless enslaved people, records were scarce, identities were often reduced, and lives were treated as property. When the Civil War ended, slavery was abolished. Mary was free, but freedom did not mean comfort. America, after the emancipation, still had several problems. Opportunities for Black women were painfully limited. Domestic labor, servitude, low-paid work were often the only doors left open. But Mary Fields was not built for that type of life. She was known for her courage, her independence, and her refusal to bend the knee easily to anyone. Accounts described her as tall, nearly standing 6 feet tall, fiercely direct, and fiercely independent. She smoked cigars, drank hard liquor, carried herself with confidence of someone who had already survived more than most. Eventually, Mary worked in households and later became connected with a Catholic convent through Mother Amadeus Doone, a nun who would play a major role in her life. When Mother Amadeus moved west to Montana Territory, Mary later followed, and that changed everything. Montana in the late 19th century was not a polished frontier. It was rough country. Towering mountains, bitter winters, mud roads that turned into traps, snowstorms that could erase trails in hours, wildlife isolation, and the constant risk of injury. It was not a place for the timid. Mary worked at St. Peter's Mission near present-day Cascade, Montana. She hauled supplies, repaired buildings, did heavy labor, and completed tasks that many men would do. She was known for fixing wagons and worked long hours in punishing conditions. But Mary's blunt style and quick temper also made her controversial. At one point, after a conflict involving a gun and a disgruntled worker, church officials separated her from the mission employment. For many people, that might have been the end of the road. For Mary Fields, it was just the beginning of her story. In 1895, Mary won a contract from the United States Postal Services to deliver mail in a region around Star Route Service near Cascade, Montana. That alone was huge. At a time when racism blocked doors everywhere, a Black woman in her 60s was able to secure a federal mail route in frontier America. Letters carried news, money, family connections, legal documents, business deals, military notices, births, deaths, hope, and heartbreak. To carry mail was to carry the thread that held distant communities together. And Mary Fields became the person that many people depended on. The route was no gentle carriage ride. She drove a wagon and stagecoach over primitive roads through mountain weather, across rough country where breakdowns and danger were common. Winter could freeze a person in hours. Spring mud could sink the wheels. A snap axle miles from town would create a survival crisis. Yet Mary gained a reputation for reliability. People would say she never missed a delivery. If snow blocked the wagon, she would strap the mail sacks to her shoulders and walk. Imagine that. An older woman in frontier Montana pushing through drifts, carrying government mail by hand through wind and ice because quitting was not an option. That image alone made her unforgettable. The West could be violent. Bandits sometimes target routes, carrying valuables. Isolated travel always carried risk. Mary was known to carry firearms to protect herself. Stories from the era described her as someone few wanted to challenge, tough and utterly unafraid to stand her ground. One account tells of her defending herself after threats from a rival. The consistent theme remains clear. People respected Mary Fields because she was dangerous to underestimate. And in a world where black women had many hills to climb, that reputation mattered. But survival on the frontier was not only about fighting people, it was about enduring nature. Snowstorms, bitter cold, long isolation, mechanical failure, animal threats, injury without having nearby medical help. Mail carriers across the West often face overturned wagons, frostbite, exhaustion, and getting stranded miles from shelter. Mary continued her route year after year. She already was an older woman and working with laborers, yet she performed one of the hardest jobs in the region. That tells you something deeper than toughness. It tells you that she possessed discipline. Mary became beloved in Cascade, Montana. Locals reportedly gave her unusual freedoms and affection, rare for her in that era. Children adored her. Townspeople helped support her later in life. Some saloons barred women, but they made exceptions for Mary Fields. That says something powerful about the frontier communities. Even in an age where there was discrimination, her character would force respect. Not everybody accepted her, but enough people did that so she became a local legend while she was still living. Her impact reached beyond the stories. Mary Fields broke visible barriers in a country that built invisible ones. She showed that competence could challenge prejudice and discrimination. She showed that a black woman born enslaved could become a trusted federal contractor in the American West. She showed future generations that roles society calls impossible are often simply untested. And she did not through speeches or titles, but she did it through action, execution. Bag after bag, mile after mile, she delivered. Mary Fields retired from mail delivery after several years, but remained a known and admired figure in Cascade, Montana. She died in 1914. By then, the frontier itself was changing. Railroads expanded, roads improved, and the Old West was fading into memory. But some names outlived the era that made them. Stagecoach Mary is one of them. Because in a nation still struggling with who gets remembered, her story cuts through the dust. A woman born in bondage, who crossed into freedom, who entered the wilderness, who carried mail when others doubted she belonged there at all. She was definitely a trailblazer. So the next time in history is told about courage and who wrote the face, remember the woman in Montana snow carrying letters through the storm. Remember Stagecoach Mary Fields, the mail carrier who refused to quit.